Is it too early to start talking about possible college football playoff teams for next year? No, it's not.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Everydayers into Locked On College Football. We are not the regular host of this program. He's still enjoying his trip, but Alex Donno in again with you guys. I'm from Locked On Canes. Got my guy Kenton Gibbs with us from Locked On Wolfpack and Locked On ACC. We are holding down the fort again today. Kenton, how are you?
I'm great as always, man. It's always a good time to get with you, Donno, because when me and you are talking, we're always talking national. We don't, in the words of Kanye West, cool out thinking we local. Come on, homie, we major, Donno. And that's what we're doing today. We go talk some national stuff because we're going to stretch all the way out to the West Coast, even though it's only the Big Ten now. So let's do
it. Right. Yeah, and I got to tell you, I'm looking through the possibilities with this 12-team college football playoff, and we know the format. They're going to go with the 5 highest-ranked conference winners are going to get the top 5 seeds. And by the way, the top 4 seeds get a first-round bye, so you really want to be in that top 4. Top 5 seeds go to conference winners only, and then seeds 6 through 12 go to the next highest-ranked teams, regardless of conference. And I'm looking already, Kenton. There's way too early rankings already, hitting the boards. ESPN did one that we'll talk about. 24/7 Sports did one. I look through top 25, but specifically top 12. I agree with most of what ESPN came up with. I do feel like there's a few teams that crack the top 12 that are, certain programs that kind of get your hopes up early in the year and don't end up living up to those expectations. But I firmly agree with Georgia being number 1. I mean, I still, obviously, you had to earn your way in. I'm sorry to say that for the Florida State fans, but, Georgia lost that last game to Bama. I still feel like Georgia, top to bottom, was the strongest team in the country last year, despite the fact that they did not get that opportunity to play for a national championship. So I can see that. Carson Beck being back, they're going to be strong next year. They get Ohio State number 2. They just had a tremendous transfer portal. Oregon at number 3. Texas at number 4. Notre Dame at number 5. So how do you feel, Kenton, about this top 5 so far? Because, again, Notre Dame, they've been good the last couple of years. Obviously not, top 4 good or even top 12 good necessarily. I feel like we get catfished every year by the Fighting Irish, that this is going to be the year that they turn the corner and win a championship. They've gotten into even the 4-team CFP a couple times, but haven't had any hardware to show for it.
They're not the only ones. Yes, they're definitely on fraud alert, but I believe Riley Leonard elevates them above another team in that top 5 that you just glanced right over. The Buckeyes and Ryan Day. What big game against an actual good team has Mr. Day shown you he can win in recent history? Don't worry, I'll wait. When's the last time that you would say, this team is one of the best 10 teams in the nation and Ohio State beat them?
You're going to keep waiting because I don't have an answer for you.
And that's my point. I can give Notre Dame the respect because while we may have questions about Freeman, we're seeing him with a level of talent at the quarterback position that we have never seen before. I know that a lot of people are not as high on Riley Leonard as I am, but I'm telling you, as somebody who covers sports in the Triangle, that man is the guy. He was everything to that team at times. And, we talk about the Florida State fans earlier. Look no further than the Florida State game last year as evidence of how important Riley Leonard was. Duke was leading the game against Florida State until what happened? Riley Leonard re-aggravates the ankle. When he goes out, the game does a complete 180 in less than 5 real-time minutes. That goes to show you how important he was to that team. I often refer to him as a Maserati amongst Volvos in Durham, and now he's going to get to be – everybody at Notre Dame may not be Maseratis, but they at least got something that can go. They got some SRTs, some Hellcats, some something over there, as opposed to an Ohio State team that has had Maseratis, i.e. Maserati Marv, and what do they have to show for it? Yeah. Blaming Kyle McCord, screaming at Lou Holtz, screaming at an 88-year-old Lou Holtz. Like, come on, man. That's a team that I don't believe you. You need more people. You need to go ahead and show me that you can win with your guys' day, and then we'll have a conversation about you being a top 5 team.
Yeah, I just think that there's this assumption, and I tend to agree with what you had to say about Ohio State, but I just think with the assumption being with that huge, alleged NIL budget that they spent on transfer portal, the fact that Michigan is going to be perceived to be down after losing so many players from that national championship team and losing Harbaugh. I do like the quarterback that Ohio State brought in and Will Howard from Kansas State. I guess we'll see how much of, last year's offensive limitations were Kyle McCord's fault, how much Will Howard can mask that. But I totally agree with you on the fraud alert stuff. I mean, if people are to assume, hey, maybe you pencil in an Ohio State win over Michigan this year, which is something you can never do, that they should have a better team on paper, that should be a team on paper that should get into the top 4, if not top 5.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? I 1,000% understand where you are on Notre Dame as well, right? If we're talking like historically, Ohio State hasn't had good showings against really good teams. Notre Dame as of late, oh, baby, it's been embarrassing. But again, I'm very high on Riley Leonard, and I believe in Riley Leonard a lot, and that's the only reason I'm saying that. Now, here's the thing. I know that the fans are waiting, and they're keeping receipts. If this ends up on Old Takes Exposed, I'll hold my L. I'll hold it. But I will also tell you this. Donno can tell you, I'll also keep receipts when I win. I also keep receipts when I'm right. And I'll tell you right now, that top 5 so far, it doesn't sound too ridiculous to me outside of Ohio State. I think that they did great things in the portal. They spent a lot of money in the portal. You know who also spent a lot of money in the portal and no recruiting every year? The Aggies. And last time I checked, they had to get a new coach this last year.
They sure did.
I get it. The money is something. It is good, right? It means, the Yankees win a bunch of championships because of it. But last time I checked, it ain't the only thing that goes into it. You know what I mean? At some point in time, you have to have the heart, physicality, and toughness to truly be that team, especially playing in the Big Ten. You can't mask a lack of physicality in the Big Ten, especially when you have to play in the game. You can't hide it.
And this is not even the same Big Ten from last year. This is an expanded Big Ten this coming season. So the other teams that made that top 12 in the ESPN way too early rankings, at number 6, you got the Ole Miss Rebels. Number 7, Mizzou Tigers. Number 8, Penn State. I mean, talk about a team that's had trouble closing out big games. That's one that gets the fraud alert notice.
Every time.
Well, number 9, Alabama, which is interesting because they lost so much, including the greatest coach of all time. Number 10, Utah. Number 11, Arizona. Number 12, LSU. Does anybody else stand out as possible frauds in that list?
I want to be kind when I say this, and I try to find kindness always when I'm talking about people. But I also have to be honest in what I would say to their face and what if James Franklin were in front of me today, I would ask him, just like I've asked plenty of coaches at ACC Media Days, what can your team do to finally get over the hump, Mr. Franklin?
Yep.
You have pissed down your leg time after time after time after time. We almost need to get you some Depends and some rubber sheets when it's a big game coming up because we know what's going to happen every single time. I talked about Ryan Day, but at least at some point in time in his history, there is, hey, we used to beat up on Michigan a lot. It used to happen a lot. Hey, we used to win big games. We used to be very competitive in the playoffs. What under God's green earth has Penn State done? Penn State is that old joke that Cat Williams said about the 300C and the actual Phantom. 300Cs look like a Phantom until a Phantom pulls up. Penn State every year looks like a playoff team when they play Wisconsin, when they play Iowa, when they play Minnesota, when they play whoever they play first game. They look like, I believe it was Auburn a few years ago that they beat up on. They look like a playoff team. And then an actual playoff team pulls up and James Franklin, his boots get a little shaky. He starts getting a little rattled. Realistically, if we're talking about teams that have not only pissed down their leg, but also lost a lot, Kalen King, Chop Robinson, a left tackle that's probably going to be one of the first offensive guys off the board, you're looking up and saying, well, how are they going to replace all that? And I believe they lost at least one of those backs. I could be wrong. I know they had 2 that were very good, but I believe they lost at least one of them. So when I look at this team, I'm asking here, where's your information coming from telling you this is going to be one of the best 10 teams in the nation when they weren't that last year with a loaded, full deck type of team?
Well, we got a lot more we want to talk about in this episode of Locked On College Football. We have the honor of filling in for the great Spencer McLaughlin. I'm Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. He's Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack and Locked On ACC. You know, in this coaching carousel, we've had so many college coaches take their talents to the NFL. It's actually kind of refreshing to see the opposite happening. A prominent NFL assistant coach is coming to work for a college program. We'll talk the latest on the NCAA getting completely neutered by the attorneys general from Tennessee and Virginia, and what the NCAA is going to try to do to salvage some of their power. And I know it's been a huge topic in college football. Florida State suing the ACC suing Florida State, ESPN piling on against Florida State for allegedly sharing trade secrets. What's the end game here, especially since I have the privilege of sitting right next to the host of Locked On ACC, what the ACC might look like in 3 to 5 years? My friends, you want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this episode of Locked On College Football. And guys, I am only getting started with FanDuel. We're winning money and we're having the time of our lives when it comes to FanDuel and all the opportunities with this NBA season going on. Guys, I'm having so much fun with my Miami Heat props, all my Jaime Jaquez Jr. props. I've been lighting it up. You can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. And of course, it's almost March, and you know what that means in college basketball. So get in on this action. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On College Football your first listen and your first watch. The everydayers, we appreciate you. Spencer's going to be back hosting the show tomorrow and through the rest of the week. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes, alongside Kenton Gibbs from Locked On ACC and Locked On Wolfpack. So I was pleasantly amused and surprised this morning, Kenton, when I saw that UCLA is reportedly, we're assuming this gets over the finish line, they are reportedly hiring longtime NFL offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy to become their OC under Deshaun Foster. In an era where so many coaches are going in the opposite direction, Kenton. Now, Bieniemy most recently with the Washington Commanders, very well known for his time in Kansas City, working under Andy Reid and winning a couple of Super Bowls there. So, first of all, credit to Deshaun Foster, because he seems to be putting an incredible staff together. I know that, Chip Kelly, the milk got a little stale there the last couple of years at UCLA, and it seems like UCLA now entering the Big Ten are spicing it up, and I'm excited to see what Bieniemy's going to do in the college ranks. Again, he has worked on UCLA's staff before, actually 2003 to 2005, so it's a bit of a homecoming for him.
For sure, and here's the biggest thing that I look at. When you talk about he came to college and why, it's because I don't know what he's doing in those interviews for head coaching jobs. I genuinely don't. I'm not going to assume and guess, but whatever he is doing must be so ostentatiously bad that he has to prove himself at a level that is unseen and unknown to mankind in order for him to get that head coaching job that he's looking for. Okay? And so with that in mind, the only way that we can look at Eric Bieniemy and say, well, why is he coming down? Is, again, he's hit that ceiling. And so many coaches that are going up, let's be honest, they've also hit that ceiling in college. Yeah. How much higher of a ceiling do you think Jeff Hafley had in college? Let's just be honest, right?
I think there's a reason why he made the move that he made.
There are multiple coaches talking about, hey, I'm done with this. The game is new and this game is different, and I got to worry about all these different things. Let me tell you something. When you're good at what you do, you really don't need to do much. You don't change. You don't adapt a ton. You know who you are. Let me rephrase that. You change and adapt a lot. And from there, you don't do all the complaining and belly aching. Right. When all of these coaches are talking about, I can't do the NIL and the players got all these rights and all this transfer portal and all that. Let me tell you something. This can of worms was opened a long time ago by the coaches. But with that being said, UCLA is doing a great job of putting together a staff that is, on paper, looking like it is going to be phenomenal. Foster as the head coach. They said they got a guy who not only wanted to be a Bruin, is a Bruin. Yeah. That's a great hire. Chip Kelly, not a Bruin at heart. You could just tell. It just wasn't – it hits different. Even when a coach is inept, but they love the university, they want to be there, you can tell. You're like, hey, you're not supposed to be a head coach, but you're like, you're going to be head of the booster club or something in a few years. Like, that's your role, and that was never Chip Kelly. You could just tell that felt like, nah, this is like your coaching rehab moment where you're supposed to do something and show us that you're ready to get a bigger and better job, but that never materialized for him. So with that in mind, Foster's building a great staff. They're moving and grooving in the right direction, and you're going to need to when you're going into the Big Ten, because that's a very different beast than the Pac-12 traditionally was. Now, last year's Pac-12 was brutal. That was a slaughterhouse, but that wasn't the Pac-12 that we were accustomed to seeing over the past 5 to 10 years or so.
Yeah, and it's so we're seeing the two titles, right? Head coach in college versus head coach in the NFL have never been more different than they are right now. And that, position coaches and coordinators, it's the same thing, because really, I mean, Kenton, obviously head coaches in college have always been responsible for recruiting, but it's at another level now. Yes. In the age of NIL, there are 2 national signing days, and players are, they're more fickle, the high school players, than ever when it comes to changing their minds and committing, decommitting, flipping. You got to deal with the transfer portal now, which wasn't a thing even a few years ago. So there are certain personalities and certain type of coaches who thrive in the college game. Obviously, Kirby Smart has been absolutely crushing it. In kind of the previous era of that, Nick Saban was crushing it. Maybe Nick Saban got tired of the way that things were evolving because, when you're an NFL head coach, I don't know, probably 80-90% of what you do is actual coaching, because you're not actually, most teams have a GM that's separate, that are picking the players and signing the players and dealing with contracts. You have to deal with staffing and coaching, whereas in college, you're really the CEO, right? College head coach. You're the GM, you're the president, you're all of that in one, and maybe coaching is only about 20% of that. And so certain personalities, I think, thrive in that. And a lot of times it's the guys who are probably better with the recruiting part of it than the actual coaching part of it.
But here's the thing that I need people to realize that we are not saying here. Number one, coaches' contracts are bigger than ever, even adjusted for inflation, much bigger than ever in college. And that's just the reality. And number two, college budgets are increasing to the point where you're seeing the creation of different positions that are de facto those things in the NFL. I'm here to tell y'all, at some point in time, the ball still gets put down at the 35. Somebody kicks off, and somebody has to be more violent, more fast, more physical, more disciplined than somebody else. What do I mean by that? They don't have GMs in college, but do you know what position does pop up in college that was never a thing before? Director of recruiting.
Yes.
Every school has a director of recruiting now. Right. And not only is there a director of recruiting, there's a director of recruiting, there's a recruiting analyst, there's a recruiting specialist, there's all these different positions that they're not paying this guy just because he's a former player. They're paying him because they know they have to recruit the players that are currently on the team, as well as these new players. And yes, it does come down to the head coach ultimately, but the reality of college football coaching is this. If you can succeed in this world, you can succeed in this world. And if you can't, you can't. That's the reality. If Saban was younger and still had that passion, fire, and fervor to do this, I have no doubt in my mind he would succeed in it. He 100%. Would be exceedingly willing. But you could see it. You could see that fire was just wasn't there to the same degree these last couple of years, right? Everybody uses the sound from when he's yelling at Julio Jones and whatnot, saying, it's caught, run the dang thing again. Everybody uses that sound on TikTok, but I want you to compare that to what he sounded like last year. It just wasn't the same guy. Yeah. And if he didn't have any national championships, and people was asking, can he still win the big one? Can he still do the thing? He for sure would have shown up and shown out. That's what happened against Georgia. Everybody said he lost his mojo. He can't outcoach his assistants anymore. Kirby is now Papa Bear. The student has become the master. And Nick Saban said, oh, don't worry. I'm going to spank that baby, put him to sleep, and then I'm going to take my team to the playoff and see what we can get going there. That's the reality of this thing. If you can do it, you can do it. If you can't, you come up with every excuse in the world. You know, JJ Redick recently called out Doc Rivers, but I want to extend that call out to all of these coaches. Every time something goes wrong, well, there's this and there's that and there's all the things. Every job in the world is becoming more.
100%.
Outside of this, I'm a recruiter, right? Everybody is now like, hey, you have to recruit and do HR and do payroll and all that. And guess what? I have all those things in my bag, so I'm not complaining and crying. The recruiting game is terrible. I can't do it. Donno, you as a host, as a radio host, you have expanded responsibilities from when you first started, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Like I've never done this much when it comes to editing and preparation and all the other stuff that comes into being a host. It wasn't like that in radio 15 years ago.
Exactly. Everything is consolidated. Where you used to have, there was an associate producer, this person, that person. Everything is now consolidated to where there are less people filling the same amount of work, if not more. These coaches cannot handle it. And instead of saying, I could not do that job effectively, that was too much for me to do effectively, they say, that's too much for anybody. You're putting too much on anybody's plate. Well, it don't seem to be too much on Kalen DeBoer's plate.
And when we come back, it's not just coaches having to adapt to this new reality. The NCAA itself is having to adapt to it. And
absolutely.
I also want to pick Kenton's brain as host of Locked On ACC as to what the ACC may look like in a few years if Florida State can actually find their way out of it. So you want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this episode of Locked On College Football. And I'm certainly not done on Gametime. Guys, I am getting sensational deals. This is the only ticket app that I use right now, and there's a number of reasons why. I love the incredible last-minute ticket deals you can get on Gametime. I'm always getting the best prices for sporting events and concerts in my area, and I love how Gametime, they give you the all-in pricing. They don't slap on those fees right at the end. Well, I think I'm getting a $15 ticket. Oh, I'm getting a $35 ticket. The all-in pricing is unbelievable, and the Gametime guarantee is really what sold me on this. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So go to Gametime, download the Gametime app, and use our code LOCKEDON, all one word, locked on, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On College Football your first listen or your first watch. The Everydayers, we love you. Spencer McLaughlin will be back in the hot seat tomorrow. So, Kenton, in light of a earth-shattering ruling by a federal judge, where I know the NCAA could still potentially fight this, but as for right now, the NCAA doesn't really have any power to enforce their own NIL rules. So here's from On3 NIL. I love how there's a whole NIL section of On3 Sports now. In the wake of the preliminary injunction halting the NCAA's power to prohibit contracts and transfer portal athletes from negotiating their NIL, President Charlie Baker has issued a letter to his membership. In a memo obtained by On3, Baker described the questions he received over the weekend, asking what Judge Clifton L. Corker's ruling means. In light of the actions, Baker announced he plans to convene the Division I Board of Directors and the Board of Governors to, quote-unquote, discuss the next steps. So I have to wonder, because there's a few different ways this could go, Kenton. The NCAA could just, kind of the way that they did with the transfer rules getting challenged, they could just sort of lay down and say, we can no longer enforce it, we just need to adapt to it. That's one thing. They could decide to fight it tooth and nail. That's another thing. Or could there be a creative alternative? Because some people have brought up the idea of maybe instead of having name, image, and likeness, essentially making players like 1099s, that schools could actually make players employees. That alternative has been brought up. I wonder if the NCAA would be creative enough to explore something like that.
It is so serendipitous when you know the inception of the word student athlete. And you see what the discussion is as the alternative to save the NCAA. For those of you who don't know the story, I can't remember the young man's name. Well, he's not so young anymore, but there was a gentleman who got brain damage while playing at TCU, and the school denied him workers' comp, and they had to find a way to say, hey, you weren't a worker for the school. you were something else. Therefore, we're not responsible for paying for your care for the rest of your life. And that's how the term student athlete was born. I know that many people don't like to live in and sit with that very uncomfortable truth, but it is the truth. And now to think, the only way the NCAA may be saved is deeming all of these athletes employees and then being the governing body over that union of employees.
Crazy. What a world.
That sits on your chest a little bit. It's like that shot of tequila, that first one, when before it tastes like I love all y'all, and is it hot in here? Is it just me? Yeah, that's that one to put a little hair on your chest. But in all seriousness, I look at this thing and I say, I was coached by living legend Ryan Nielsen in college, and one thing that he used to say was, I used to tell quarterbacks all the time after a sack, don't run because you'll just die tired. NCAA, don't fight this. You will just die tired. Find a way to either work this thing out or just give up and keep it pushing. Let's be very honest about what is happening, right? And this plays right into our conversation about realignment. We're heading towards college football being a separate entity. Yeah. Because it's so much bigger than everything else. It makes so much more money than everything else in college. If you combine nearly every other sport, and I mean every single other sport, every single other team in the NCAA outside of FBS and FCS football, who do you think wins that battle in terms of who makes more money? Take a wild guess, Donno. The boys playing with the big skin. You know what I mean? Yeah. So when you look at that, you have to understand that, of course, these players are going to want different rules because they're bringing in a different type of money. And this is America, the land of opportunity. If you have a skill, you want to capitalize on it. That is what our system is based on. That is what the free market says you're supposed to be able to do. That's what's going to happen at a high level here. So if I'm the NCAA, I'm pushing, hey, listen, guys, forget that old stuff. We want you to be employees.
No more student athlete. We're all on the payroll now. We're a big happy family.
We're all together in this thing. We're rowing the boat in the same direction. Your oar, my oar, we're all going in the same way. Because if they try to fight this, they'll just end up dissolving as football moves to that separate thing. And all of the non-revenue sports and sports that don't generate as much revenue kind of fend for themselves and try to create something that keeps them sustainable and afloat.
No, and you raise a great point. It's a perfect segue because the NCAA, at least in terms of governing football, they're reaching an existential crisis because now with these super conferences coming together, because that's what the Big Ten and the SEC are now. They are now super conferences, and they may not be done expanding. It could reach a point where the super conferences might decide, why don't we just govern ourselves? Like, why do we even need the NCAA anymore? And, another school that could be kind of a power broker in this are the Florida State Seminoles. And you cover Florida State because you cover the ACC. I talked about this with Blackerby yesterday, Kenton. I don't believe Florida State would be fighting it this hard if they didn't have an idea that they have a soft landing somewhere else. I feel like they're pretty confident they can get into the Big Ten. I think most signs are pointing to that. So what do you think the ACC is going to look like 3 to 5 years from now? And if we do see super conferences, will the ACC have a seat at that table?
No. And that's with all due respect. I think the ACC will end up. But here's the thing. A lot of people are pitching doom and gloom about the ACC that they'll end up like the Pac-12. And I strongly disagree. I think they'll end up like the Big 12. I don't think that they'll have the heavy hitters per se because the Big 12 folks got mad at me, yelled at me, called me everything but a good Christian when I said that on Locked On College Football Live. And here we are. All these months later, I said, who's the heavy hitter in the Big 12? Everybody threw out all these different answers. And I said, you want to know how I know you don't have a heavy hitter? Because everybody's got different answers.
That's a great point.
If you got one or two of them, you know who. If you ask who's the heavy hitter in the Big 10, what do people say immedially?
Yeah,
Michigan, Ohio State.
Yeah.
Maybe if you consider the new schools, you throw in Oregon. Maybe, maybe Lincoln Riley, if they can figure out how to play some defense over there, maybe, But if you say who are the heavy hitters in the SEC, Bama, Georgia, LSU, those are your heavy hitters. When everybody's screaming out, this team's a heavy hitter, that means you don't have one. Okay. And so that's what the ACC will likely resemble. But that does not mean the death of the ACC. Earlier you pitched the idea of will they be alive or will they thrive? They will survive. That's what they will do. They will survive. I don't think, and here's my biggest thing. I think that the Big 12 and them are making a huge mistake by not combining. I think that merger could save both feasibly in the future. I really do.
Yeah, they could become maybe super conference would be generous, but super conference light. Like it would definitely be, they'd be more powerful combined than they are separate.
Yes. It's a very simple concept. I don't know if they've never seen Planet of the Apes or what, but as Bobo told Caesar, apes together, strong. Apes separate, weak. Same thing for the conferences that are not SEC and Big Ten. If you are together, you are stronger. If you are separate, you are weak and easily picked off. But here's why I say that they will end up more like the Pac or the Big 12 than the Pac-12. The difference is all of these schools do not have better options to go to that will make them more money. You have to keep in mind when the pie is, when you go somewhere else, you are going to their table. It's like a new kid coming to the table, right? Now, all of these kids are about 15, 16 years old. You don't know exactly what their life's going to be, but you're starting to see a picture. You're starting to get, hey, this kid is taking all those advanced classes. Hey, this kid does math so good, they call them human advocates. Hey, this kid's been suspended out of every single school they've been in. This is going to be a little bit of a problem. You see what I'm saying? Like you're getting that picture for this situation. And with that being said, if you're a new child coming to somebody's house, Donno, you've got little ones. What does a little one mean? Outside of the love and affection, of course, the actual raw numbers of it, you're splitting your pie. Your check looks different when it's not just Donno that you're spending on. You're spending on baby Donno too. So now
and he is expensive.
And guess what? That's the same thing for these teams. No offense to these schools, but just imagine, what is Wake Forest going to bring to the Big Ten? What are you going to bring? What is let's talk about teams in the Pac-12 here. What is an Iowa State going to bring to the SEC? That's the reality of what you're looking at. And that's not a disrespect to those teams. NC State is in there too. And so that's my alma mater. Love it to death. But that's just, the reality. These schools have to realize, even if you can muster up the money to get the buyout, which I think Florida State is going to end up ultimately doing. Even if you can
they'll settle for a lower, some manageable buyout, I think is what.
Yeah, so even if that buyout is manageable for Florida State, it's not manageable for everybody.
No.
I've said this a million times on there, and I'll say it a million more. It's like those stories of, hey, we paid off our house, we paid off our car, and we paid off all our student loan debt in 4 years. And here's how we did it. And then you read the story, and it's like, we live with our parents in their mansion, and we got a six-figure job, mid-six-figure job at my dad's stockbrokerage or whatever the case may be. And on top of doing all that, our parents gave us a $200,000 push gift when my wife got pregnant. Of course you can do it. Of course you can. 99.9% of people aren't there. That's what I'm looking at for the rest of the ACC teams. Just like when Texas and Oklahoma decided to leave the Big 12, everybody wasn't like, oh, man, who's next? Is Kansas leaving?
Right.
Oh, man, who's next? Is Oklahoma State on the outs? No, it's just, it doesn't work like that. And you still need to, even if it's a feasible buyout for Florida State, you have to make it feasible for NC State. You have to make it feasible for Virginia Tech, for UVA, and it's just, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, no, that's well said, and a lot of good stuff here. And I always love working with this man. Follow him on X at TGIF_Kenton. You can follow me at Alex Donno. Make sure you check out our shows. Kenton does Locked On Wolfpack and Locked On ACC. I do Locked On Canes, and Kenton had a blast with you, my friend. Now, I'm sure, we won't be on this show tomorrow. Spencer's back, but I'm sure we'll be collaborating again soon.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Donno, you're my mother from another brother, man. The Italian stallion. Is always good to see you every time I can, and I can't wait till actual football starts back up. So me, you, and Drake Toll can get back at it every single Friday with our level 38 locks.
I'm so excited for that. I'm even excited for spring football. I'm just jacked up.
Hey now.
We'll talk to you guys again next time. Thanks to the everydayers on another episode of Locked On College Football right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.